Welcome to Actionable Impact, and today we're joined by my great friend, Maureen Davenport, the head of corporate affairs at KPMG. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you because KPMG sits at a really interesting spot. You are both an enabler of AI, an auditor of AI, and you have to run your own communications department in the mix of it. So you see a lot of different sides.
Yeah,
So,
that's right. Yeah.
and maybe just to kick us off, as a assurance professional, do you feel better or worse about corporate communications because of AI?
Okay, so I feel better, but just to be clear, I am not an auditor. I am not an insurance professional. I am a reputation, brand, communications professional, but I feel really good about it. And actually, for us and for our brand, it's so relevant as we think about kind of trusted and responsible and the role we play. So while I'm not an auditor, although I'm often asked for evidence of my statements because of where I work, but I feel really good.
Uh, well, good. We do too. And let's start with the organization, then we'll move to communications. But just tell us a little bit about, I know you're moving from the experimentation phase, right, to the orchestration phase. You've talked about this a lot. How is moving AI out of the IT department and into the hands of people? How does that actually translate to your team?
Yeah, so we've been doing a ton of work on this, and actually, we just released the first in a series of research that we're doing with UT, where we're actually having University of Texas evaluate over 1 million prompts of our people to look at how that's evolving, and the findings were pretty interesting in terms of people who treat AI like a task, right? So that more transactional relationship, they are less successful and less likely to kind of change the way they work. Whereas when we looked and evaluated the prompts, the people who are more sophisticated about it, so you give the context, you give a little bit more information, you really treat the AI as more of a teammate or a thought partner. We found that those people actually move to expert a lot more quickly. And so what does that mean? Well, that means we probably have a pretty big gap in our workforce. I think our workforce is probably a pretty good indication of kind of where people are. So some people are just going to keep doing things the way they've always done it and stick with it, and they're maybe intimidated or scared or fearful or whatever about AI. And then you've got the other side of that, of the people who are moving really quickly, embracing it, getting more and more sophisticated. And so as we think about that and really starting to embed AI into our work more generally, there's a really important aspect of not leaving sort of part of the workforce behind. And so we've been really intentional about our training. We're using that UT research to inform our training. We're making it mandatory because what you measure often is how you change. And we're making sure that sort of we're meeting people where they are. So creating no judgment zones, sort of doing all of the things to really move people to see the value, but also fundamentally we have to change the way we work.
Well, and so let's pivot to the communication side of the house, the marketing corporate affairs side of the house. So how much does your team benefit from the technology, the training that's happening on the consulting side of the house?
Yeah, so I would say we benefit from it, and I think we have another really important role, even in addition to the benefit, which is we test it. So we aren't and we don't need to be the technical experts, but just like the role we play in kind of every other aspect of our work, we sort of say like this doesn't make sense, or could we? Have we tried? And so we often test a lot of things out in order to say to the teams, this isn't going to make sense. This isn't going to resonate. This feels too clunky. So for us, there's a huge benefit, and it is changing the way we work, and it is changing. I don't think it's making us necessarily just more efficient yet, but we are seeing efficiencies in aspects of what we do, and ultimately obviously we're going to be a lot more efficient with a lot more volume, but most importantly, I think we're going to be more effective because of that time we'll spend on judgment, critical thinking, kind of moving the firm forward, and I think that's the real opportunity.
Well, could you give us some examples? Is there something today that you would absolutely require people to use AI for, but maybe something that you would say, absolutely not, we're never going to use AI for this?
Yeah, so for our team, for corporate affairs specifically, we absolutely require it for very, very basic things like press release writing, right? Which is so basic, and yet so many people like to get their hands in it, and therefore a press release often ends up telling no story and is relevant to no one. So we absolutely use, AI in that way for did you put it through our press release agent? Does it make sense? Are we telling a story? Is it the story we want to tell? We use it for we use it definitely for many tasks within the team. I would say where we're seeing huge value is actually in prep. So where in the past we would say this reporter may for our internal leaders. In the past we may say, well, this reporter will probably ask you about one, two, three, and we kind of test it out that way. Now we're before the interview, we're creating an agent based on what the reporter actually is likely to ask in their voice, in their
Love it.
tone, in their so that's been a super helpful way for us to play around with the tools to prep and then that makes us better advisors as we go to our leaders to say, here's how the question will probably be framed if it comes from this reporter versus another reporter. And that's been really helpful for us to play around with, and that makes us better when leading our conversations with our leaders. In terms of what absolutely not, I think absolutely not using any kind of AI without human in the loop, which I know is fuzzy, but uh, there's there's too much nuance and too much judgment to let go of that. So absolutely use it right up until the point where the human, the critical thinking, the expertise, the experience has to come through.
Well, and one of the examples I've heard you give before is around how do you give feedback to leaders? And I know in a professional service firm you have a lot of internal clients, right? Experts, practice leaders, et cetera. What can you told me a story once of how you give feedback in terms of how they're being perceived, and if it's, hey, it's not our judgment, but look at how this is reading to AI. Would you mind
Yeah.
sharing that?
Yeah, not at all. So we have tools that the human can sort of say, great job, you did well on this, and not, all communications people know the deal. But we also have ones where you can actually, test it yourself. So we'll say, look, here was how we received it, and by the way, we also have an agent who's working with us, and here's the feedback that they got, and it's sometimes a little bit more brutally honestly, and that's helpful because that sort of look in the mirror moment is super helpful for people. And look, we also give the option to sort of say, try it, test it out, prep yourself, do your speech, use it, and see what's going to happen. Get the feedback, and it's just between you and the tool, and we'll work with you too. So I think it's the and strategy that becomes so important. And look, as you know, because we work with you on these things, we were prepping our leaders for commencement speeches this season, and it was a really helpful to have the feedback about how AI was going to get received in a lot of those commencement speeches, and to practice it with that context. It just is an and of value.
How about the combination of internal and external communications? Because you obviously support both sides of the house. Have you found that we talked a little about external, but have you found that it's also helpful on the internal side?
It's definitely helpful on the internal side. Think really in terms of how do we engage folks differently, and actually bridging that gap between internal and external. So we had an alliance announcement recently, and it was
With
a
with Anthropic?
with Anthropic.
Yeah, small AI company, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it was really important to us in how we talked about that alliance, which, that deal is a lot of things, but importantly, Anthropic and Claude powering our digital gateway platform, which is hugely important. But instead of doing AI on the side, again, it's an example of we're embedding Claude into the platform, which is a huge differentiation for the firm and for our clients, a huge amount of value that they'll get out of that. And so I use that as an example to say, obviously, that's an external alliance announcement, but it's really important that internally our people understand what does that mean and what's going to be better about their job and their experience in using Gateway as the platform and meeting clients where they are to get better, faster, real-time information. So the experience is better for our people, for our clients, and we're not doing AI on the side. We're embedding it in and powering our incredible platform.
And one of the other areas that I've heard you speak a little bit about is how, because KPMG is helping organizations through their own AI journeys as well as yours, not just doing that on the client side, but also thinking about that on the philanthropic side, right? And how we support nonprofits. Could you talk a little about that? Because I think that's really unique.
Yeah, it's been and it's unique and rewarding. So a couple weeks ago we had our community impact day where we do a ton of volunteering and kind of we're in the community, show up in person, all of those things. But we also have an AI impact initiative. And that was something we launched a couple of years ago, which is helping to using our expertise to bring it to nonprofits, help them come along on their journey, and really tailor kind of that training, that learning, that development for our nonprofit partners, which has been incredibly valuable, rewarding, and you see so much benefit kind of right away. So it's something we'll continue doing.
Oh, I bet the team loves it.
Yes, they do. The team loves it. Our nonprofit partners love it. And it's a really tangible way to show up differently in our community. So, yes, going into the community and being there to fix up a park is important, but it's also important to help the nonprofits learn and invest in this really important way of working, which will fundamentally change how we all work and interact in the future.
All right, terrific. Well, let's play a little buzzword bingo if you don't mind, and
All
we'll just
right.
kind of quickly hit through a few of the big topics that are out there, and you can tell me yes, we're really trying this. Here's how's it working, or nope, we're not into it.
Okay.
But so maybe just starting with agents. Obviously, you mentioned a little bit. How do you have communication specific agents? Do you have internal? Do you have leader agents like your CEO agent, or how do you think about that?
Yes, we have agents for everything. So is that buzzword? Probably buzzword. We have agents for everything and everyone. Some are better than others. One thing that I've been really focused on with our team is I do think that there's this intimidation between the people who are far along on this journey and the people who are testing and probably more in that transactional category. So we're sharing our agents much more openly. So if you have an admin agent that is terrific for everything you need that you have every day at 4 p.m., sort of a summary of your mailbox and everything you need to get done. Great, share that. And then everybody can customize it, but we're starting from the same place because what I found is people are kind of like, I'm not even going to change because I'm not sure where to get started or how many agents I need. So we're making them all available, which small but important, no judgment zone, helping people. I also think for our leaders, they just keep getting better. Obviously, the more content we get, the better the agents are going to be. But we're creating agents for, if you can think of it, we're creating an agent for it. And some are better than others.
Well, and on leaders, just so you explain it to people, so you're creating basically agents in the voice of your leaders because they have a whole sort of corpus of writing, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So in the voices of and then really importantly, we're still there looking at, does that make sense? Is that the message we're trying to deliver? And so we still do have that and we will always have that human kind of, is this really the message we're trying to communicate? How do we make it better? How do we make it kind of more their voice?
Terrific. How about GEO or sort of optimizing the reputational landscape?
Yes. So, yes, I think we are definitely our team is definitely, focused there, but I think we have work to do to get better and better as we think about fundamentally the way we work, the way we think about that reputation, the way we measure our reputation. That is an area where we are definitely doing interesting things, and I would like us to move a little faster.
Yeah. Also on measurement, how about synthetic data? How do you think about, traditional polling versus maybe some of the new kinds?
Yeah, so we're still more in the traditional if from a communications
hmm
perspective, from my team's perspective, but certainly that's kind of where I think everyone, including us, is headed.
How about the role of influencers, right? So, and interestingly, KPMG has not just digital influencers, but you've got some mega sponsorships, right? Of really famous athletes, other individuals. How do you think about the sort of the individual role versus brands today?
So we are looking at how do we influence and get better and achieve scale using AI with our kind of brand and our ambassadors, and how do we do that globally? So I think that's an area where we are definitely focused and also, thinking about what technology should we be investing in? Who should we partner with? One of the things that our management committee does is every 6 weeks, about 6 weeks, we're out on the West Coast in Silicon Valley meeting with these startups, meeting with the A16Zs of the world, meeting with, JC2 to hear about the technologies that are being created, hear from the founders about sort of where should we partner on these specific uh, for example, cybersecurity firms that are going to help us sort of make sure that that there's trust in the AI, deep fakes, whatever it is, and make sure that we're kind of thinking around the corner, how do we embed that into our work so that as we think about our brand, as we think about our brand ambassadors, as we think about where we show up, we can have certainty and trust in that because of course that's core to who we are.
And how do you stay current in this?
Well, does
Like,
anyone stay current?
well,
Is it
who do you read or follow or learn from?
Yeah, everybody. So I think that's the thing that I follow all of the same. I listen to all of of course, I listen to our AI Daily Brief because we
Of
sponsor it,
course.
the best, Hard Fork, all of a million podcasts, your podcast, of course, but
Thank you.
a million podcasts, a million publications, constant alerts all through the night, but it's fascinating. It's almost impossible to kind of keep up with all of the changes. And one of the things that I think the firm's been really good about is, we are getting those perspectives not from just the media or just the podcasts that we individually follow, but we're actually pulling in our people who are on the ground working in this environment for their perspectives on a really frequent, at least weekly basis to make sure that we're looking around corners and thinking about it. It's everything, but every day I wake up and I think, Mythos was a good example of like, okay, wow, that sort of changes the game. And so I think every day it feels like you've got to stay on top of it.
Yeah. How about vibe coding, right? Because obviously, traditionally, the communications team were probably not particularly technical, but obviously
Yeah.
now they're a lot more capable.
Yeah, so that's actually, I think there's huge opportunities, and as we think about it, even looking at our team and who's kind of more sophisticated, who's moving toward that expert, it's using the different tools and technology, and so we're starting on that journey and thinking about sort of what that could look like. Look, I think everything in terms of so there's this question of are we going to are we at risk? Are we the kind of communications profession at risk? I think we have this incredible moment of opportunity because of the importance of judgment, the importance of nuance, the importance of human connection. I and we must change the way we work. So, I've been after the, for example, intranet my whole life. It's kind of like we got to crush the things that we haven't been able to stop doing, and I think we'll be able to do that, using the various tools that we have and AI and meeting people where they are, customizing more easily, reducing the cost of that production and just making it easier to change, but we must change and focus where we provide that value. So yes, we're going to experiment and be on a journey and do all of these things, and we fundamentally have to let go of sort of the old ways of working. Otherwise, we won't continue to be as valuable and relevant as we are today.
So, what do you think in a year from today or 2 years from today? What do you think is going to separate the corporate affairs teams that thrive in this area versus survive it?
So I actually don't think it's that different than what it's always been, right? Are you the best, the brightest, the most curious? Are you willing to take chances, take big swings that are calibrated to the risk that your organization is willing to accept? And are you willing to fundamentally change? So let go of those sort of old narratives around you must have a role that does X and move toward everyone has to everyone has to be moving toward at least expert in AI. We must change the way we work. The shape of our organization will likely change, and we focus on the thing that makes us valuable, which is that human judgment, critical thinking, curiosity, interest in learning everything there is to know about not AI, but really, how to influence and impact reputation. And so I think that's who will thrive. But that to me doesn't feel new. That's kind of always who's thrived. It's just that now we have different tools to be successful.
Yeah, maybe faster.
Faster for sure.
Do you have a dream feature? If AI could do one thing that would make your team more effective, what would it be?
So I do think, I do think there's this overload of information that has gotten people to the point of just sort of shutting down and turning off. And so what I would love in terms of a dream as a communicator and as a person who cares deeply about reputation, I would love to turn off that noise. So if AI could help us meet people where they are, customize, reduce the cost of production, reduce the time to production, and actually let people learn the way they want to learn, uh, about our firm, about their benefits, about whatever it is that is important. That would be my dream kind of disruption. And I think that disruption is coming very quickly. And I think that's to everyone's benefit because too many people are too distracted in this moment with too much noise. And we've got to kind of focus on what matters in order to free people up and protect the brain to actually engage in human connection and relationships.
Yeah. And, what so does it change what you're looking for when you're recruiting? Does it change what KPMG is looking for?
Yes, absolutely. For so long, I think way too so KPMG generally, yes, and I think there will be disruption at kind of all levels. I don't think the audit business won't look the same in a year from now that then, it'll look different than it does today, for sure. Same with tax, same with advisory. In communications, absolutely. For too long now, I've not liked this for a while, but for too long, it's kind of like years of experience, writing skills, kind of ability to work in different products. Like now, all of that is table stakes, and I think at the entry level, they're going to be doing much higher value work, and therefore you must be able to use the tools in order to be able to appropriately apply that level of judgment, even at those entry level roles. And I think that's gonna be really important for the generation kinda coming out of college now, that they work on their human interaction EQ skills in a way that I think's kind of been undervalued. So maybe liberal arts is coming back. Who knows?
We can hope. Is there any other advice that you would I mean, that sounds like great advice for folks coming out of school today. Is there any other advice that you would give to chief corporate affairs officers, chief communications officers, if there was one switch that they could make to their teams that you think would help?
Yeah, I think, change, stop hiring. So one of the things that we talk a lot about is sort of what is the trifecta of work going to be? And we think it's workforce, and that's agents and humans. It's the work itself, and it's the workplace. And the workplace isn't just the physical building, but it is actually all of the things that go into the workplace. If you think about the work itself, it is fundamentally changing. Right? It is going to be different than what we do, how we do it. And so when you focus on that, that should inform. So I think we need to think about in our teams, stop holding on to even if your systems are sort of dragging you back, we have to hire differently. We have to think differently about value. We have to think about a person who's good at managing agents and people, right? And doing that really effectively. We need to think about metrics differently. For too long, I think communications has been slow to adopt really true ROI. Well, we've got to move away from that. So my advice would be, show up for sure. Show up, learn, test, try, take big swings and experiment. But at the end of the day, the work is changing and therefore our workforce may change. So be a leader in that change and not a detractor from the change.
Well, terrific. That was a lot of actionable impact. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me.